Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're doing well. My name is Juan, I am just one reader, and I am here to review one of my favorite books of the year so far, a book that has definitely taken me by surprise, The Little Friend by Donna Tartt. So this is a book that really made me think a lot. I have a lot of things that I would like to say about this book, so I have decided to structure my review like this. Firstly, I will give you a completely spoiler-free and very vague plot synopsis. Then I will talk about the reputation and the negative hype surrounding this book. Then I will give you my opinion, what I thought about the book, and then I will go over the things that I loved about this book, mainly the writing style, the characterization, and the themes. Some of the aspects of the human condition and of human nature and human experience that this book explores really cleverly and really uniquely, in my opinion. Then I will go over some of the psychodynamic considerations, some of the psychoanalytical concepts or ideas that you can explore using this book as a guideline, and then finally my conclusion. So starting with the plot synopsis, I would like to keep this as vague as possible because this is actually a very vague kind of novel and it's not focused that much on the plot. Basically, we follow the story of Harriet, who is a wonderfully precocious and interesting 12-year-old girl who lives in Alexandria, Mississippi with her family. When Harriet was a baby, she had an older brother who was, I think, 9 years old at the time, and one day he was found dead, hanging from a tree. No one really knows what went down, no one knows what happened, if he was murdered or if it was a suicide. No one knows. This is a mystery with a capital M, and this is what we discover from the very opening lines and from the prologue of the novel. So then we jump into the actual storyline of Harriet when she is 12 years old and she decides to take matters into her own hands and try to find out more about what happened to her brother and how did he die, and if it was a murder, who did it. And so she starts this kind of quest for justice and revenge, and that's all I'm going to say in terms of plot. This book has a very interesting reputation and a very particular kind of negative hype. So Donna Tartt first published The Secret History in the 90s, which became a big popular hit and also a very critically acclaimed book. It is a pretty perfect novel. It's kind of a murder mystery, but with a twist. And I think people really loved that and still love that novel because it manages to do a lot of things and really well and really differently. It's a book that talks about art, and it's a book that contains some really intellectual, philosophical debates, and it's also a mystery novel in a way, and it is incredibly fast-paced and thrilling and very satisfying on many different levels. So that was in the 90s, and then 10 years later she published this book, The Little Friend. So people were kind of anticipating it very eagerly because everybody had raved about The Secret History 10 years prior to that. So people were really excited to read it, and when they did read it, they found that this was something completely different, just something altogether, a very different kind of novel, with a very different feel, with a very different kind of payoff, I guess. And people were very disappointed. I mean, still to this day, people really don't like this novel, especially when compared to her other books. So this was kind of not very well received. And then 10 years later, Donna Tartt published The Goldfinch in 2013, which of course became a massive hit, and it won the Pulitzer, and I guess Donna Tartt kind of reivindicated herself as the wonderful and very enigmatic, mysterious literary icon that she is. So I've always felt that The Little Friend is Donna Tartt's bastard child in a way, because it's the book by her that people don't like. It's a book that people really don't like by an author who people otherwise really love and kind of worship. And so I went into this book with a lot of trepidation and a lot of anxiety in terms of, you know, people really don't like this book. And what happens if I don't like it either? Donna Tartt has written The Secret History and The Goldfinch, which are two of my favorite books of all time. So please don't let me down, Donna Tartt. That's what I was thinking to myself when I first opened up the pages of this book. So people are kind of very negative about this book. Just overall, people don't like it. And I think that is because they are expecting something that this book is not even going to bother trying to deliver that. This book, I guess, could sound like a murder mystery or like a mystery novel, but it really isn't. And looking into, you know, people's negative reviews, I think the common denominator is that people are very disappointed and very frustrated by the satisfaction and the payoff. And in terms of the mystery, the murder mystery, what happened to this little boy who was killed, or if he committed suicide, what happened to him? This is a question that goes unanswered, and I don't consider this a spoiler at all. I actually feel like people should come into this book knowing that this is not going to be a quest to find out the truth, or if it is, it's not necessarily going to lead to finding out the truth, because that's just the way that life is. You can go on a quest and you can try something and you can attain some kind of secondary byproducts in that quest, but you're not necessarily going to get what you want. So I think that was deliberate from the author, and this is something that I want to comment on later on in this review, but I think that was something very, very intentional and deliberate from Donna Tartt's part of kind of misleading the readers into believing that they would get something that ultimately they don't get. I think that people who really feel very intensely negatively about this book feel cheated or betrayed. They feel frustrated by the writer, and I think that is very valid, but myself, I didn't feel that. I knew coming into this book that I was not invested in the story, or I was not looking forward to reading this book to find out what happened. So that's why I was able to just enjoy the ride and enjoy the journey, not so much the destination. So coming into this book without any expectations whatsoever really helped me appreciate all the wonders that it has to offer. And if you are looking forward to reading this book yourself, I would absolutely recommend you to forget the murder mystery aspect of it and the curiosity of what happened, to just forget that and savor all the literary things and all the wonderful things that this book has to offer instead, because otherwise you will be very frustrated and you will feel cheated by the end. So, my opinion, I freaking loved this book. I gave it 5 stars, and even though I would probably rate this as Donna Tartt's least accomplished novel, or at least my personal least favorite of her 3 novels, just because the Secret History and The Goldfinch are just complete gems, jewels, and I just love them to death. I did love this to death as well, but I would rank this in 3rd place, honestly. But I still gave it 5 stars, and I still found it incredibly mind-boggling and really thought-provoking. It is mesmerizingly beautifully written. I mean, even if you don't like the plot, or if you're not interested in the plot, even if you do feel cheated at the end, and if you feel very frustrated and disappointed by the payoff, or the lack of a payoff, even then, you have to appreciate the writing style and the way that it's constructed and the way that Donna Tartt has this ability to tell a tale. She is an amazing storyteller. So now I am going to go in a little bit more detail into the things that I really loved about this book. The first thing that I have to highlight is the writing style. I think that is Donna Tartt's biggest strength, at least for me. Every single time that I have read one of her novels, I have been blown away by the level of craftsmanship that goes into her novels, into the way that she constructs sentence by sentence and word by word. There's a reason why this woman spends 10 years of her life writing a novel. You can see that. You can actually see and feel that effort and that level of care and editing. You can see the editing process in the finished product. You can see the level of care and revision, and yeah, it's wonderful. She has a very beautiful writing style, very elaborate. There are passages that take your breath away because they are just so poetic and gorgeous and rich. But it never feels pretentious to me. It never feels purple prosy and, you know, just being wordy for the sake of being pretty. No, it feels true. It feels true and literary, and her use of dialogue is wonderful, even though there is a very sparse use of dialogue. She almost never uses dialogue in this particular novel. She's very descriptive, but her descriptions are so lush and so wonderfully insightful that you really feel completely captivated and immersed in the story. I mean, Donna Tartt's books are always incredibly atmospheric, and you become a character yourself. You become a part of the story, and you are almost like a voyeuristic participant in her stories. The second aspect that I want to highlight about the construction of this book is the characterization. There are many characters in this novel, as it happens with Donna Tartt's other novels as well. We have a lot of characters, some of them good, some of them bad, some of them have shades of gray, some of them are more evil than the others, at least more evidently evil. Some are children, some are grown-ups, we have animals, we have a little bit of everything in this novel. It feels like a great ensemble cast of characters, but really the main shining jewel of this novel in terms of character is, of course, its protagonist, Harriet, this precocious little girl who, well, kind of teenager or pubescent girl, if you will. She's 12 years old. She still has some very innocent qualities to her personality, but then she has a lot of precocious traits as well. She feels a little bit like Hermione in a way, but at the same time, they're very different. I feel like Harriet is wilder than Hermione, but I could definitely see some similarities between those two characters. Harriet is wonderfully interesting. You love her from the very first description of her, the very first time that Donna Tartt introduces her. You absolutely fall in love with her, and yeah, she is just a wonderful character, probably my favorite character of 2018 so far. She is wonderful, lovely, and wild, and conflicted, and neurotic, and problematic, and I love characters like her. Now I want to talk a little bit about the themes, and I'm going to use my eraser board just as a visual aid to feel like a teacher. So the themes, well, when I talk about the themes, I just want to make it clear that I did not study literature or anything like that. So when I say themes, I mean certain aspects that I think this book explores really well and really differently and really uniquely, I think, about human interactions and the human condition in general. And these are just things that I kept constantly exploring and thinking about while reading the book and after I finished reading the book. So the first one is the theme of violence and justice. This is a theme that is really present from the very opening lines of Harriet's story. It's a story of revenge in a way, so you could actually consider Violence and Justice in terms of revenge and how she is trying to avenge her brother. It also explores, I'm just gonna go over this very quickly because otherwise this video will become a 3-hour kind of lecture, and I don't want that, and you don't want that, believe me. So another aspect or theme that this book explores is family dynamics in general. We explore Harriet's entire family history. It's kind of a little bit complicated and hard to follow sometimes because Donna Tartt really explains with a lot of detail everything that happened in her family, her grandmother, her aunts, mother. Every single aspect of the family is investigated in the novel, and it's a really good exploration of those dynamics and all these different relationships between these characters. The next one is grief. Of course, this is a novel about grief. It's a novel that starts out with a tragedy, with a horrible, horrible, horrible tragedy. The death of this little boy, Robin, Harriet's older brother. And we see the repercussions of that tragedy, and we see the different manifestations of grief. For example, in the character of Charlotte, who is Harriet's mother, you can really see how grief has affected her as opposed or as contrasted to Charlotte's own mother, Edith, who is one of my favorite characters. She is, of course, Harriet's grandmother, and she has a completely different, almost opposite way of expressing or dealing with that grief. It's also a very interesting novel about grief in that when you talk about resolution and how the mourning process works, and this is something that I will get into later when I talk about psychoanalysis, the mourning process, how does it come to a close? Does it come to a close? Is it ever finished? Is it ever completely elaborated? This is a novel that makes you think a lot of that, the resolution of this tragedy and of grief. And of course, without spoiling anything, I already told you that this is a book that does not provide you with those answers. It does not provide you with the answers that you would like to have as a reader and that the characters would like to have as members of this family. So I think that is a really great, deliberate point that Donna Tartt is trying to convey to the reader in terms of how sometimes you just have to deal with not having the answers that you would like. It is also a novel about perception and how different people perceive things and circumstances in a different way. It's a novel about doubt, and I was able to see this very clearly in the things that have to do with childhood. This is a book told mainly from the perspective of Harriet and one of his friends, or her best friend, Healy. And so you become a child with them, exploring the world and looking at the world the way that they do. And so it is from the perspective of childhood and through the lens of childhood that you see this really big conflicts. Okay, so the next theme that I want to highlight in here is social classes. We are in the South, in Alexandria, Mississippi, and even though, of course, we're not dealing with slavery anymore at this point in which this story happens, there is still a very, very, very present conflict between social classes, a very clear distinction between social classes. This book explores this a lot. There's a lot of maids that are characters in the story, and I just love it how Donna Tartt painted this conflict between social classes and this distinction between people. All of the maids and just all of the servants in general, or people who have menial jobs, and I say that, you know, with trepidation, but people who have the more kind of menial jobs are always Black, they're always African American, and you get to see the conflict between the white and the Black, and the level of racism that that is still present between these characters. I also want to say one of the parts of this novel that impacted me the most in an emotional level was, this is not a spoiler, it's a point in the story in which a maid is fired, or she quits. She has to leave the home that she works in, and that is one of the most emotionally horrifying things that I've had to read. I was really, really shaken and really impacted by that. It was heartbreaking. And the reason why I put this over here, the title of the novel is The Little Friend. And you don't really know what that title is alluring to, who the little friend is, until the very end of the novel. And once you figure out who the little friend is, and you start to infer, once you start to infer why the novel is titled The Little Friend, I think the bigger themes make themselves apparent. And I think those are innocence and responsibility. And I think this ties in with these themes of violence and justice, also perception and doubt, and of course the social class conflict is really important in terms of why this novel is titled The Little Friend, and in terms of the climax and the resolution of the story, which of course I am not giving away because you have to read this novel. Okay, so next up, I'm going to start talking about the psychodynamic, psychoanalytical aspects of this book. So if you don't care about psychoanalysis, or if you don't want to know all of the psychodynamic things that I have to say here, if you just want the literary analysis and the literary things that I am going to say about The Little Friend, you can stop watching now. I loved The Little Friend. I gave it 5 stars. Like I said, I think it's a book that you absolutely should read, just keeping in mind that it's not going to be a thrilling murder mystery that is going to give you all the answers that you want. So, if you're still here, why don't you come here with me and let's start talking about some really basic principles of psychoanalysis and psychodynamic theory that are very well represented and explored in this book. These are really, really simple, basic concepts or principles of psychoanalysis, so I'm not going to explain them very much. Because if you are familiar at all with psychoanalysis, you probably already know what I am talking about. And so I am not going to explain in detail. So, one of the things that this book explores is, of course, like I said, the process and the concept of grief, the experience of tragedy and its consequences. This is, of course, one of the basic principles that Freud himself discovered, how grief works, how the mourning process works, what happens internally in our conscious and unconscious, primarily unconscious mind, that makes the experience of grief be a certain way for different people. So this book focuses on a quest, Harriet's quest to come up with answers as to what happened to her brother. This is, of course, a direct mirror or reflection of the mourning process and how it is a process that seeks elaboration and that it has different phases or different parts of the process that the subject has to manage. When I say subject, I mean the person who is experiencing grief has to deal with and has to manage in order to get a satisfactory enough elaboration of grief. This is, of course, one of Freud's theses from one of his most important and wonderful masterpieces. The article Mourning and Melancholia. I think if you enjoyed reading The Little Friend, you should try to read Freud's Mourning and Melancholia. It is very accessible. It's, I think, a really accessible Freudian text. It's very short and it is a complete masterpiece. And even today in the 21st century, it is one of the most enlightening texts about depression and grief and guilt. So basically what he explores in this article, Mourning and Melancholia, and that we can see in The Little Friend, is how the subject has an object. The object is lost. It can be a person who dies, or it can be any kind of idea or notion or thing or ideal that the subject has invested with cathexis, whether it be libido or aggression. And since this object is lost, naturally the cathexis that has been invested by the subject comes back to the subject, and by the process or the mechanism of introjection becomes a part of the subject. So something that can happen as a byproduct of this kind of complex dynamic process of the mind is that the object becomes idealized. This is the process of idealization that is very, very well portrayed in the novel The Little Friend, in the character of Robin, the little boy who is dead, who is found dead, hanging from a tree, and immediately becomes a kind of saint-like mythical figure. The book really explores this in a very Freudian way, and I loved that. Now, this, of course, leads me to the topic of aggression, because something that we know as a principle of psychoanalysis is that whenever something or someone becomes idealized, what that unconsciously means is that behind that idealization is a big cumulus amount of aggression. And that's why idealization is actually a defense against that said aggression. So someone who investigated these processes of idealization and aggression in terms of the mourning process was, of course, Carl Abraham, one of Freud's most important disciples, and, of course, Melanie Klein, who is one of the most important voices in psychoanalysis today, and she is, one of my favorites. And something that she discovered, among many other things, was this concept here of manic defenses. Basically, these are unconscious ways in which the subject tries to control the object or triumph over the object in order to manically deny the guilt and depression from the mourning process, and therefore the object becomes idealized. Another psychoanalytical principle that we can see really clearly in The Little Friend and really well executed is the theory proposed by Melanie Klein, which is, of course, a theory that has to do with childhood and with the different fantasies that children have and the way that they manage those fantasies, what they do to deal with those fantasies, and how those are dealt with later on in adult life. So basically, and I am summarizing this like you have no idea, but yeah, being really synthetic here, Melanie Klein proposes that there are two positions in life. These positions mean that you have a very specific different way of managing certain types of fantasies. So the first position is the schizoid paranoid position that, when is satisfyingly enough resolved, leads into the depressive position, and then the depressive will, at some point or other, will come back to the schizoid paranoid position and again into the depressive, and it's kind of a thing that is constantly changing. It's kind of an interplay of positions. We are in life, even as adults, we are constantly going from the schizoid paranoid position into the depressive and vice versa all the time. And this interplay of Melanie Klein's positions is really well portrayed in The Little Friend, in the way that the different sets of characters. You know that do you remember that I told you that this feels like a big novel with a big ensemble cast of characters? I think that's for a good reason, because they all deal with life very differently. For example, on the one hand, we have Harriet and Healy, the children protagonists, and what they deal with mostly in terms of affects or fantasies has to do with guilt and revenge, and that's very, very clear in their plotline. This contrasts with the Radcliffes. The Radcliffes are these characters who are white. They are described as rednecks or hillbillies. They are drug addicts. They are really poor. They are very vulnerable in a lot of ways. They are very paranoid. This is what they have to deal with internally, this constant paranoia that from a Kleinian perspective would go, this and this would have to do with the first position, the schizoid paranoid position. And then we have the adult characters. We have a lot of adult characters, but mainly we have members from Harriet's family, her aunts, her grandmother, her own mother, and they are primarily dealing with mourning, remorse, and reparation, which developmentally has to do with the second position, the depressive position. Now, this is really interesting because whereas the adult characters are more in the second depressive position, and the Radcliffes are absolutely in the first position, the schizoid paranoid position, which means that they are more psychotic than neurotic. Harriet and Healy, because they are children, are kind of in between. They're kind of representing that interplay itself, from coming from one position into the other and then back and then again. So I think that was very interesting. And then I wanted to put here religion and all these different types of animals, because they have a very important thematic, symbolic importance. They're very prominent in this novel. Characters deal a lot with religion, and characters also deal a lot with wildlife. Snakes, which are of course incredibly symbolic and represent a lot of different things, but primarily represent evil and aggression and sexuality. And also we have birds, cats, and dogs. And I think the Donna Tartt's use of this symbolic representatives of libido and aggression, religion and snakes, birds, cats, and dogs, this is the way that Donna Tartt includes all of this psychoanalytical theory in her writing style. And finally, the last psychoanalytical thing that I want to discuss has a lot to do with my personal reaction to the novel and why I loved it and appreciated it so much. And I think this is one of the novel's biggest strengths, and I think this is the psychodynamic explanation of why the novel has the effect and the impact that it has. Okay, so this novel, I think, mainly deals with pre-Oedipal anxieties. What that means is we deal with death, loss, guilt, paranoia, a big sense of dread of incoming danger, something that feels like a floating menace that you never really know what is going to happen, but it's a sense of catastrophe. Then we have abandonment, helplessness, and fragmentation. Those are anxieties that these characters experience and that Donna Tartt masterfully embeds in her writing style, therefore making you, the reader, experience all these different pre-Oedipal anxieties that are more primitive than, say, castration. There is also some castration anxiety present in the novel, particularly towards the ending of the novel, but we're mainly dealing here with pre-Oedipal anxieties, more primitive than the phallic stage of what involves the Oedipus complex as we understand it. So if we sort of add all these pre-Oedipal anxieties, what we get is a great, great sense and a feeling of terror. And I think this is wonderful because The Little Friend is an absolute terrifying novel. It's terrifying not because it's necessarily scary or upsetting or, you know, it's not a thriller, it's not a terror novel, it's not a horror novel, but the anxieties, the level of anxieties being pre-Oedipal, are absolutely terrifying, and they, by the mechanism of regression, they make you, the reader, become a child again and experience all these things as you did as a child. So there's a big regressive quality in reading The Little Friend that is terrifying. So talking about terror, I absolutely have to mention this author, Wilfred Bion, who is one of the most important voices in the school of object relations in psychoanalysis, and it's the theory that I ascribe to, that I adhere to. He came up with this concept of nameless terror. Basically, Wilfred Bion proposes that in the earlier stages of life, the child has to deal with really impossible menaces, really fantasies and forces that are completely beyond his level of dealing with the world. The child is helpless. Again, helplessness. The child cannot survive by itself. You know, human beings are pretty much the only animal that, or the only animal that has to be as dependent for such a big chunk of their early life. There really isn't any other animal that has to be as dependent on their primary caretakers as humans do. Humans are absolutely helpless and dependent for many years before they can begin to be a little bit independent. So this has to do with this concept of nameless terror, of the things that the child cannot deal with on its own or by himself or by themselves, and so therefore he needs a mother. The mother can be the actual mother, or it can be the father, or it can be any parent, or if not a parent, it can be any kind of caregiver or person that can provide the child with the function of becoming a metabolizer. So in this theory, the mother becomes the object that metabolizes or digests all the different things, all the different elements that have to do with aggression and sexuality, life and death, that the child by himself cannot deal with. So the mother becomes a kind of processing tool to help the child unconsciously start developing that, that function of metabolizing these elements. That's very difficult to explain in English. I know all of this in Spanish, but trying to translate this into English is hell. So anyway, I am bringing all of this theory up because the big center of the novel, or one of the big cores of The Little Friend, the novel The Little Friend, is religion, and how religion is exactly doing this for the characters. Many people, not every person, but most people or many people use religion as a kind of artificial metabolizing. I mean artificial because religion is something created by humans. It's something that is created by mankind in order to achieve exactly this function of metabolizing, of help me deal with the things that I, being the tiny, helpless human that I am, cannot deal with on my own. So here I am putting God, according to psychoanalysis, according to psychoanalytical theory, God is a projective identification. God is a concept, a notion, a figure, ultimately an object that is created by the subject through fantasy, in order to project and in order to introject certain qualities and certain certain fantasies and certain effects and certain things. I am not going to go into this a lot because it would take forever, and this video is already incredibly long. But suffice it to say that religion is playing a very big part in The Little Friend, and we can see how religion is very prominent because it helps characters deal with these pre-Oedipal anxieties, and sometimes successfully and sometimes very unsuccessfully, as is the case with the Radcliffe brothers, these characters that are very paranoid. And I also wrote here art and the Goldfinch because I think this is something that Donna Tartt is very concerned with. I don't know if this is intentional or conscious, but in the novel The Goldfinch, she is also exploring the same anxieties and the same kind of very early primitive conflicts, but in a different way. In The Little Friend, she explores them through religion, whereas in The Goldfinch, she explores them through art. And this is why, according to psychoanalysis, and according to me, and this is something that I believe is absolutely true, religion and art are the same. They are different things, of course, but unconsciously, they have the same meaning and the same purpose, the same function. And they are both creations, religion and art, God and art, are different manifestations of human impulses and human defenses. That's really the key here. They are responses that humans have created to deal with their different fantasies and impulses and whatever. So in that regard, these are defenses. They are kind of defensive figures. So yeah, that is a psychodynamic examination, exploration of The Little Friend. And now, I don't know who's still watching this video. I think no one is watching this video at this point. But now I'm gonna go into my overall conclusions. The Little Friend by Donna Tartt is a wonderful novel, in my opinion. I gave it 5 stars, and even though I can absolutely see why people don't like it or don't generally like it, because they feel cheated or misled by the premise of this kind of murder mystery that is actually never really solved or answered, I think it's a novel that, first of all, is beautifully written with amazing characters. It is slow-paced in some moments, but there are moments that are so tense and propulsive, and I was constantly on the edge of my seat and I could not stop reading. It is a very scary novel. It is very claustrophobic, it immerses you in this kind of Southern Gothic thing, in this kind of dark vibe. It deals with religion and with wildlife and different things that make the book feel dark and mythical and magical in its own particular way, and claustrophobic and oppressive. It is filled with wonderful characters that you will remember forever, particularly its protagonist, Harriet. And I think all of my thoughts and all of my praise can be summarized by saying that every single time, every single minute that I spent reading this novel, I was feeling like I was reading a novel with a capital N, a novel, like a big thing. So yeah, I would love to hear or read your comments down below. I know this video is way too long, and I probably went into a lot of detail, particularly in terms of the psychoanalytical stuff, but I know that some people might be interested in that, and I just needed to get it out of my system. So I would love to hear your opinions, your thoughts on The Little Friend. Please leave your comments down below, and I will see you on the next video.